You think people misunderstand you. But what if the real problem is you? Pause. What if the reason conversations feel heavy, the reason rooms go quiet when you speak, the reason some people slowly distance themselves, is not because they're jealous, not because they're rude, but because of something you do, without even realizing it? Think about that. You walk into a meeting, or a family gathering, or maybe just a simple conversation with a friend. You speak. You explain. You defend your opinion. You correct someone's mistake. And in your head, you believe you're being honest, logical, smart. But something shifts. The other person's face tightens, just slightly. Their shoulders stiffen. Their responses become shorter. The warmth disappears. You don't notice it in the moment, but they do. And later, they remember how you made them feel. Not what you said, how you made them feel. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people never accept. Human beings don't care about truth as much as they care about ego. Yes. Even you. Especially you. Imagine this. A man publicly criticizes a criminal, calls him foolish, calls him wrong, exposes his flaws. From the outside, it seems justified. But inside the criminal's mind, he doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as misunderstood. Every villain in history has believed they were right. Let that sink in. The most dangerous people on earth rarely wake up thinking, I'm wrong. They wake up thinking, I'm justified. Now bring this back to your daily life. When you correct your colleague sharply, when you argue with your partner, when you point out someone's mistake with a tone of superiority, what happens inside their mind? They don't think, thank you for improving me. They think, you attacked me. And the moment someone feels attacked, their brain shifts into defense mode. When defense mode activates, learning stops, connection stops, influence stops, and you lose, even if you were right. That's the first hidden layer most people never understand. You can win an argument and lose the person. You can prove your point and destroy your influence. You can be correct and still be completely ineffective. Think about how many times that has happened to you. There was once a powerful industrial leader who almost destroyed his own company, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he criticized harshly, publicly, frequently. He believed criticism produced excellence. Instead, it produced resentment. When he shifted something small, not his intelligence, not his authority, but his approach, everything changed. Production improved. Morale improved. Loyalty improved. Nothing external changed. Only one thing changed. He stopped attacking ego. Here's what you must understand about human nature. People rarely blame themselves. If a worker fails, he blames circumstances. If a spouse argues, they blame misunderstanding. If a child misbehaves, they blame unfairness. And when you criticize someone directly, you challenge their self-image. And self-image is sacred. You might think, but if I don't criticize, how will they improve? That's the trap. You assume people change because they are corrected. In reality, people change because they feel safe. They change because they feel understood. They change because they feel respected. You cannot force growth through humiliation. You can only invite growth through dignity. Now pause again. Think about someone who criticized you harshly in the past. Did it inspire you? Or did it make you defensive? Did it make you eager to improve? Or did it make you secretly resent them? Be honest. Because if you felt that, so does everyone else. This is the silent rule governing human interaction. Criticism wounds pride. Wounded pride builds resistance. Resistance destroys influence. And influence is the true currency of relationships. Not authority. Not intelligence. Not loudness. Influence. You may believe being blunt makes you powerful. But bluntness without empathy is not strength. It is social carelessness. And carelessness has consequences you don't see immediately. Doors quietly close. Invitations slowly stop. Opportunities drift elsewhere. Not dramatically, subtly. And the most dangerous losses in life are subtle ones. Now here's the uncomfortable twist. You criticize others for the same flaws you forgive in yourself. You justify your anger as passion. You justify your interruption as clarity. You justify your harsh tone as honesty. But when someone does the same to you, you call it disrespect. And you've done this too, haven't you? The truth is, every human being is emotionally wired to protect their self-worth. When you damage that self-worth, they don't grow. They defend. And once someone is defending themselves, you have already lost your ability to influence them. So what's the alternative? If criticism fails, if direct confrontation backfires, if proving someone wrong only pushes them further away, what do you do instead? That's where most people panic. Because letting go of criticism feels like losing control. But what if the opposite is true? What if withholding criticism is not weakness, but strategy? And what if the most influential people in history mastered something far more powerful than correction? Something subtle. Something disarming. Something almost invisible. You've seen it before. Someone walks into a tense situation, and instead of pointing fingers, they listen. Instead of accusing, they observe. Instead of humiliating, they elevate. And suddenly, the entire emotional climate changes. Huh? What are they doing differently? Why do people lean toward them instead of away from them? There is a principle here. A principle so simple that most people ignore it. And yet, it has shaped presidents, business magnates, negotiators, and leaders for decades. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But if you don't, the next shift might change the way every conversation in your life unfolds. Because the moment you stop attacking ego, you unlock something far more powerful. And most people will never realize what that is. But you're about to. You unlock something far more powerful. You unlock cooperation. Not forced agreement. Not silent compliance. But genuine willingness. And the difference between those three will decide the quality of every relationship you ever build. Imagine this. You're in a heated discussion. The air feels tight. Words are sharp. The other person's voice rises just slightly. Your instinct kicks in. Defend. Correct. Win. Your heart rate increases. Your mind gathers evidence like a lawyer preparing for battle. You prepare your next sentence, the one that will finally shut them down. And in that exact moment, you have a choice. You can protect your ego, or you can protect the relationship. Most people choose ego, and they don't even realize it. Here's something uncomfortable. When you argue, you're not trying to find truth. You're trying to avoid losing status. Because being wrong feels like shrinking. It feels like humiliation. It feels like losing ground in a silent hierarchy that exists in every human interaction. So you push back harder. And so do they. Now pause. Have you ever won an argument and felt distance afterward? A strange silence. A cold politeness. That's the cost. You won the surface battle. You lost the emotional war. The strange irony is this. The harder you try to force agreement, the more resistance you create. Because when someone feels cornered, their brain does not evaluate logic. It protects identity. There was once a brilliant man, sharp, confident, intelligent. He loved debating, loved dismantling weak arguments, loved exposing flawed reasoning. People admired his intelligence, but they avoided conversations with him. They smiled at him, but they didn't trust him. Because every interaction felt like a test. And no one likes feeling tested. Then something shifted. He made a decision that felt unnatural at first. He stopped arguing. Not because he became weaker, but because he realized something most people never understand. You cannot win someone to your side by making them feel small. So instead of saying, "You're wrong," he began saying, "That's interesting. Help me understand your thinking." Notice the difference. The first statement challenges. The second invites. The first triggers defense. The second lowers it. And once defense lowers, influence begins. Think about that. What happens inside someone when you genuinely ask them to explain themselves? They relax. Their shoulders drop. Their voice softens. Because you've given them something rare. Validation of their perspective. Not agreement. Validation. And validation is oxygen to the human ego. Now here's the subtle psychological shift. When you stop trying to win, people start listening. When you stop proving your superiority, they stop protecting their pride. And suddenly, the conversation transforms. Instead of two egos clashing, you have two minds collaborating. But this requires something difficult. It requires humility. Not fake humility. Real humility. The ability to say, I may be wrong. That sentence alone has more power than most people realize. Because it disarms tension instantly. When you admit the possibility of being wrong, you remove the other person's need to attack. You eliminate the battlefield. And without a battlefield, there is no war. Now imagine using that in your daily life. At work. At home. With friends. Instead of escalating, you soften. Instead of asserting dominance, you express curiosity. Instead of correcting publicly, you appreciate privately. And here's the twist. People will begin to feel drawn toward you. Not because you're louder, but because you're safer. And safety is magnetic. But wait. Does this mean you never disagree? No. It means you disagree strategically. There is a massive difference between saying, you're wrong, and saying, I see it a little differently. The first one attacks identity. The second one introduces perspective. And perspective invites thought. Attack invites defense. Which one do you think builds influence? Here's something even deeper. Every human being carries an invisible sign around their neck. It says, make me feel important. Not powerful. Not dominant. Important. And when you ignore that sign, you lose connection. When you step on that sign, you create resentment. But when you honor that sign, you gain loyalty. Think about the last time someone genuinely appreciated your effort. Not flattery. Not manipulation. Real appreciation. Didn't it make you want to give more? Didn't it make you want to do better? That's the hidden lever. Appreciation changes behavior faster than criticism ever could. Because appreciation feeds identity. Criticism threatens it. And people move toward what feeds them. They move away from what starves them. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. How often do you criticize, compared to how often you sincerely appreciate? Be honest. Most people are quick to notice mistakes. Slow to notice effort. Quick to correct flaws. Slow to acknowledge strengths. And then they wonder why people don't feel connected to them. And you've done this too, haven't you? There's a reason some leaders inspire fierce loyalty without raising their voice. They understand a simple truth. The deepest human craving is the desire to feel significant. Not rich. Not famous. Significant. And when you give someone that feeling, you gain something far more powerful than obedience. You gain devotion. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine ignoring someone's contribution. Overlooking their effort. Taking their presence for granted. At first, nothing dramatic happens. But slowly, their enthusiasm fades. Their energy drops. Their warmth disappears. Again, the most dangerous losses are subtle ones. So here's the silent transformation happening right now. You're beginning to see that influence isn't about control. It's about emotional intelligence. It's about understanding that every person you meet is fighting a battle inside their own head. They want to feel valued, respected, understood. And if you become the person who gives them that, your social power multiplies quietly. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But there's a deeper layer. Because appreciation can be fake. Curiosity can be strategic. Humility can be performed. And people can sense that. So the real question becomes, How do you make it authentic? How do you genuinely shift from ego-driven interaction to influence-driven presence? Because if this becomes manipulation, you lose everything. And that's where the next shift begins. Because people are not stupid. They can feel insincerity the way you feel heat from a flame. You can say the right words, use the right tone, even smile at the right time. But if your intention is control, they will sense it. And once they sense manipulation, trust evaporates. So the real transformation isn't in your words. It's in your motive. Let me show you something. Imagine two managers. The first praises his employee and says, "Great job on that presentation." But inside, he's thinking, "Good. Now he'll work harder for me." The second manager says, "That presentation was powerful. The way you handled the objections showed real composure." And inside, he genuinely respects the effort. The words may sound similar, but the energy is not. And energy communicates faster than language. You've felt this before. When someone complimented you but something felt off. When someone said, "I'm happy for you," but you sensed comparison. When someone acted supportive but subtly tried to outshine you. Humans read microsignals constantly. Tone shifts, eye contact, breathing rhythm, facial tension. Your brain processes all of it in milliseconds. So if you want real influence, you must change what's happening inside you, not just outside you. Here's the deeper truth. You cannot fake respect. You either see value in someone, or you don't. And if you don't, your influence will always hit a ceiling. Because people give loyalty to those who honor their dignity. Now think about someone you genuinely admire. When you speak to them, your voice softens slightly. Your attention sharpens. You listen more carefully. Why? Because you see their worth. And that perception changes your behavior automatically. Now imagine choosing to see worth in everyone. Not because they deserve it perfectly, but because every human carries something valuable. The quiet one in the corner? He may have insights no one else notices. The loud one in the room? She may be covering insecurity with confidence. The difficult colleague? He may be protecting himself from past humiliation. When you begin looking for the hidden struggle behind behavior, your irritation turns into understanding. And understanding changes your tone. And your tone changes their reaction. Think about that. Most conflicts are not about disagreement. They're about wounded identity. Someone feels unseen. Someone feels dismissed. Someone feels unimportant. And instead of saying, "I feel overlooked," they argue about something trivial. You think you're debating facts. You're actually navigating emotions. This is why logic alone rarely persuades. Because persuasion happens through feeling first, then reasoning. If someone feels respected, they become open. If someone feels diminished, they shut down. It's that simple. And yet, most people never operate from this awareness. They operate from ego reflex. Let's go deeper. There's a reason certain historical figures could move entire crowds with just a few words. It wasn't just charisma. It wasn't just confidence. It was their ability to make individuals feel personally seen, even in a crowd of thousands. They spoke to identity. They spoke to pride. They spoke to hope. And when people felt understood, they followed. Influence is emotional alignment, not intellectual domination. Now pause and consider something uncomfortable. How often do you truly listen? Not waiting for your turn to speak. Not preparing your counterpoint. Not filtering their words through your own story. But actually listening. Silently. Attentively. Without interruption. Most people don't. They listen to respond. Not to understand. And when someone feels deeply understood, something powerful happens. Their resistance lowers. Their trust increases. Their respect grows. Because you've given them something rare in a noisy world. Attention. Undivided attention is one of the highest forms of respect. And respect builds influence. But here's the challenge. Listening requires patience. And patience feels slow. And in a world addicted to speed, slowness feels uncomfortable. So we interrupt. We assume. We jump to conclusions. And we damage connection without even noticing. And you've done this too, haven't you? The irony is painful. We want people to value us. But we rarely make them feel valued. We want people to understand us. But we rarely seek to understand them. We want loyalty. But we don't offer significance. And then we wonder why influence feels out of reach. Now imagine reversing it. Imagine walking into every interaction asking silently, how can I make this person feel important? Not flattered. Important. How would that change your posture? Your tone? Your choice of words? You would stop interrupting. You would stop correcting publicly. You would notice effort. You would remember names. Names. There's something almost magical about hearing your own name spoken with respect. It signals recognition. It signals identity. Says, I see you. And most people crave that more than money. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But here's where it gets even more powerful. Because making someone feel important isn't about grand gestures. It's about precision. Specific appreciation. Specific listening. Specific acknowledgement. Vague praise feels hollow. Specific recognition feels real. Instead of saying, you did well, say, the way you handled that objection showed composure and confidence. Now you're not just praising. You're validating identity. And identity is what people protect most fiercely. So when you validate identity, you bypass defense. You gain access. But there's still a deeper layer. Because influence isn't only about making people feel important. It's about guiding them, without them feeling guided. And that requires something subtle. Something almost invisible. The ability to plant ideas in a way that feels like they discovered them themselves. Because people rarely resist their own conclusions. They resist imposed conclusions. And once you understand how to do that, your conversations will never feel the same again. But that shift requires letting go of something most people cling to desperately. Control. And until you're ready to release that, you won't fully unlock what comes next. Because control feels safe. When you control the conversation, you feel powerful. When you direct the outcome, you feel secure. When people agree with you, you feel validated. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control someone's thinking, the more they resist. Silently. Subtly. Sometimes even unconsciously. Think about the last time someone tried to force you into a decision. Just do it this way. Trust me, I know better. You're overthinking it. What happened inside you? Even if they were right, something tightened. You felt pushed. And when people feel pushed, they push back. That is human nature. Now imagine a different approach. Instead of telling someone what to think, you ask questions that guide them. Instead of saying, this is the solution, you say, what do you think would happen if we tried it this way? Notice the shift. You didn't remove your idea. You changed the delivery. And something subtle happens when you do that. The other person begins participating in the idea. Participation creates ownership. Ownership reduces resistance. And when someone feels ownership over a decision, they defend it, even if it originally came from you. Think about that. People don't like being told. They like discovering. That's why advice often fails. But insight succeeds. There was a negotiator known for resolving conflicts that seemed impossible. Two parties would walk in, angry, defensive, unwilling to compromise. He didn't lecture them. He didn't dictate terms. He asked questions. Carefully crafted ones. Questions that made each side explain their fears, their motivations, their priorities. And slowly, as they spoke, something shifted. They heard themselves. They realized contradictions in their own arguments. They softened. And often, the solution emerged from their own mouths. The negotiator never imposed it. He revealed it. That is influence at its highest level. Not overpowering. Not dominating. Guiding. Silently. Now imagine applying this in your own life. Instead of arguing with your partner about finances, you ask, "What matters most to you about this purchase?" Instead of criticizing your colleague's mistake, you ask, "What do you think we could improve next time?" Instead of correcting a friend publicly, you say privately, "How did you feel about how that went?" You're not surrendering your authority. You're transferring dignity. And dignity builds trust. But here's where it becomes even more powerful. When you genuinely allow someone to express themselves, you give them emotional release. And emotional release creates openness. Most people walk around carrying unspoken frustrations, unheard opinions, unacknowledged ideas. When you become the person who listens without interrupting, you become safe. And safe people are rare. Rare people are valued. Valued people are influential. But let's confront something deeper. Sometimes you don't listen because you're afraid. Afraid that if you let them speak fully, you might lose your position. You might look less intelligent. You might have to admit you were wrong. And admitting you were wrong feels like losing. But in reality, admitting wrong strategically increases respect. When you say, "You know what? I hadn't thought of it that way," you don't shrink. You expand. Because confidence is not the absence of error. It's the ability to acknowledge it calmly. And calm acknowledgement disarms tension instantly. Now imagine two people in conflict. One insists they're right. The other calmly says, "You may be right. Let's look at it together." Who appears stronger? Strength is quiet. Insecurity is loud. And people are drawn to quiet strength. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But here's where influence becomes almost invisible. When you allow someone to talk about themselves, their affection for you increases. Strange, isn't it? You didn't entertain them. You didn't impress them. You simply let them speak. And they walk away thinking they enjoyed the conversation. Because they felt heard. People associate good feelings with the person who created them. So if someone feels understood around you, they associate that comfort with you. That's not manipulation. That's psychology. But it only works if it's genuine. If you pretend to listen while waiting to speak, they'll feel it. And the illusion breaks. Now let's take this even deeper. Why do people love talking about themselves? Because their experiences are their identity. When they speak about their challenges, their victories, their dreams, they are revealing who they are. And when you honor that revelation with attention, you honor them. And when someone feels honored, they lower their guard. And when the guard lowers, influence flows naturally. But there's still one more shift. Because sometimes, even when you listen, even when you respect, even when you guide gently, someone still resists. Why? Because change threatens comfort. Even positive change. And if you want someone to move in your direction, you must make them want to move. Not force them. Not corner them. Want to. And that requires understanding desire. Not your desire. Theirs. Every human action is driven by desire. Recognition. Security. Achievement. Belonging. Status. If you try to push someone toward what you want, they hesitate. If you show them how your idea fulfills what they want, they lean in. Subtle difference. Massive impact. So instead of saying, "I need this done," you say, "This will help you stand out." Instead of saying, "You should improve this," you say, "This could elevate your reputation." You're not manipulating. You're aligning. Alignment creates momentum. And momentum feels self-directed. But here's the final question for now. Are you willing to release the need to win in order to gain influence? Because as long as your priority is proving yourself right, you'll remain powerful only in your own mind. But the moment your priority becomes making others feel valued, you gain power in reality. And what comes next requires even more emotional discipline than you expect. Because now we're stepping into the most fragile territory of all. Pride. Not loud arrogance. Not obvious ego. But subtle pride, the kind that whispers, "I deserve recognition. I shouldn't have to say sorry first. They should understand my value." That quiet voice inside you, it controls more of your relationships than you realize. Let me show you something uncomfortable. Imagine someone criticizes you unfairly. Your chest tightens. Your jaw stiffens. Your mind starts building a defense instantly. You replay the situation. You gather evidence. You prepare your counterattack. You don't say it immediately. But inside, you're ready. Because your pride feels threatened. And threatened pride demands protection. Now flip the situation. Imagine you are the one who made a mistake. A real mistake. You overlooked something. You reacted too quickly. You misjudged someone. And someone calls you out. What is your first instinct? Defend. Explain. Justify. Minimize. Very rarely is it, "Yes, that was my fault." Why? Because admitting fault feels like lowering your status. But here's the strange psychological truth. The person who admits fault first often gains more respect. Because it signals confidence. When you acknowledge your mistake before someone else points it out, you remove their power to attack. You disarm criticism before it forms. And something fascinating happens. The other person softens. They no longer feel the need to push harder. Because you already lowered your guard. Think about that. When two people both try to protect pride, conflict escalates. When one person lowers pride intentionally, tension dissolves. But this requires something rare. Emotional courage. It's easier to defend, harder to admit, but far more powerful. There was once a leader who discovered this the hard way. He made a serious business decision that backfired. Publicly. Embarrassingly. Instead of shifting blame. Instead of hiding behind excuses. He stepped forward and said, "I made the wrong call." No excuses. No justification. And instead of losing respect, his credibility increased. Because accountability builds trust. Defensiveness erodes it. And you've done this too, haven't you? You've defended something you knew deep down was wrong, just to protect pride. And later, you felt the weight of it. Because defending ego is exhausting. Owning mistakes is freeing. But here's where it gets even more subtle. Sometimes the mistake isn't even yours. And yet, choosing to absorb a little blame can prevent a larger conflict. Now pause. Does that feel unfair? Of course it does. Because pride demands fairness. But influence demands strategy. If absorbing a small discomfort protects a relationship, which is more valuable? Being right or being effective? Most people choose right. Influential people choose effective. And the difference compounds over time. Now imagine walking into a tense situation and saying, "I may have contributed to this misunderstanding." Notice the word may. It doesn't collapse your position. It opens space. And space allows dialogue. Dialogue builds clarity. Clarity reduces tension. It's a chain reaction. But it begins with humility. Humility is not weakness. It is controlled strength. Weakness reacts. Strength responds. Weakness shouts. Strength speaks calmly. Weakness defends instantly. Strength listens first. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But there's another layer beneath pride. Desire for recognition. Every human being wants credit, wants appreciation, wants acknowledgement, wants their effort seen. And when that desire is ignored, resentment grows quietly. You may not see it immediately, but you feel the distance over time. Think about a time you worked hard on something. Maybe no one noticed. Maybe someone took credit. Maybe your effort was brushed aside casually. Didn't something inside you shut down? That small internal shutdown is the beginning of disengagement. and disengaged people are impossible to influence because they stop caring. So if you want influence, learn to distribute credit generously. When something succeeds, highlight others. When something improves, acknowledge contribution. When someone grows, recognize it publicly. You lose nothing by giving credit. In fact, you gain loyalty. And loyalty is more valuable than admiration. Admiration is distant. Loyalty is committed. But here's where most people struggle. They fear that giving too much credit makes them invisible. They fear losing spotlight. They fear being overlooked. That fear is ego again. And ego always thinks in scarcity. But influence operates in abundance. The more importance you give away, the more it returns to you. Quietly. Naturally. Without force. Now imagine becoming the person who admits mistakes quickly, listens deeply, gives credit freely, guides gently, speaks respectfully, questions strategically. How would people respond to you? They would trust you. And trust is the gateway to persuasion. Because once trust exists, you don't need to push. Your words carry weight automatically. But trust takes time. And one careless moment of ego can crack it. That's why emotional discipline matters. Not sometimes. Always. Because influence isn't about occasional techniques. It's about consistent presence. And presence requires self-awareness. So here's the real question. Can you monitor your pride in real time? Can you notice when you're defending ego instead of protecting connection? Can you choose calm over reaction? Because the next layer is not about conversations anymore. It's about shaping motivation itself. And once you understand how to ignite someone's desire from within, you won't need to convince anyone of anything ever again. Because convincing is force. And force creates friction. What you're about to understand is something far more subtle. People do not act because you want them to. They act because they want to. Every action, every decision, every effort, it begins with desire. Not yours, theirs. Think about the last time someone tried to motivate you by saying, "You have to do this." How did that feel? Heavy, restrictive, almost rebellious. Now think about a time when you genuinely wanted something. No one had to push you. No one had to remind you. You moved automatically. Effort felt natural. That is the difference between pressure and desire. And if you want influence, you must learn how to awaken desire in others. But here's the critical mistake most people make. They talk about what they want. I need this finished. I want better results. This matters to me. And they expect the other person to feel motivated. But why should they? Your goals do not automatically become their goals. Your urgency does not automatically become their urgency. So when someone resists, you label them lazy, uncooperative, difficult. But the truth is simpler. You never connected the action to their desire. There was once a parent frustrated with their child's refusal to go to school. Every morning became a battle. Get up. You're going to be late. This is important for your future. Nothing worked. Because the child did not care about future success. That wasn't their desire. But they did care about making friends. They did care about being part of a group. They did care about feeling included. The moment the parent shifted the conversation from, "You have to," "You'll get to see your friends," resistance faded. The action didn't change. The framing did. And framing shapes motivation. Now apply that to your life. At work. At home. In friendships. If you want someone to improve performance, don't speak about company goals. Speak about their growth. If you want cooperation, don't emphasize obligation. Emphasize benefit. If you want loyalty, don't demand it. Create an environment where staying feels rewarding. Think about that. Most people fail at influence because they ignore perspective. They assume others see the world the same way they do. But perspective is personal. What excites you may bore someone else. What motivates you may exhaust someone else. So real influence requires curiosity. You must ask yourself, what does this person truly want? Recognition, security, autonomy, belonging, achievement. Once you identify that, you connect your request to their desire. And suddenly, it feels like their idea. Remember what we said earlier. People resist imposed conclusions. They embrace self-generated ones. The same applies to motivation. When someone feels that acting benefits them personally, effort becomes voluntary. And voluntary effort is powerful. But here's where it becomes even more refined. Desire cannot be fabricated. If you promise benefits you cannot deliver, trust collapses. If you exaggerate outcomes, credibility weakens. So the alignment must be honest. You must genuinely look for the intersection between what you want and what they want. That intersection is influence, and finding it requires empathy. Now pause. How often do you truly consider what the other person wants before making a request? Not what they should want, not what you think they want, but what they actually care about. Most people don't ask. They assume. And assumption creates friction. There's a reason the most persuasive leaders speak in terms of shared vision, not commands. They say we. They say together. They say our goal. Because shared ownership activates belonging. And belonging fuels action. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But there's a deeper dynamic at play. Sometimes people resist not because they lack desire, but because they fear failure. Fear embarrassment. Fear inadequacy. So even if the action aligns with their goals, they hesitate. In those moments, your role shifts again. From motivator to encourager. You must lower perceived risk. Show them that mistakes are acceptable. Show them that growth is valued. Show them that effort matters more than perfection. Because when fear decreases, desire surfaces. And when desire surfaces, movement begins. But here's something subtle. If you constantly correct someone's mistakes harshly, you increase their fear. And fear reduces initiative. Then you wonder why they lack drive. You created the hesitation you now criticize. Influence requires consistency. You cannot inspire desire one day and crush confidence the next. Because trust builds slowly and collapses quickly. Now imagine being the kind of person whose presence increases motivation. Not because you demand it, but because you awaken it. People would seek your guidance. They would value your opinion. They would feel energized around you. And that is real social power. But there's still one final transformation ahead. Because influencing one person is one thing. Influencing many, without authority, without force, without pressure, requires mastering something even more delicate. Emotion itself. And once you understand how emotion drives collective behavior, you'll see why logic alone was never enough. Because emotion moves people. Logic just justifies the movement afterward. Think about the last major decision you made. A job change. A relationship choice. A financial risk. You probably explained it logically to others. But if you're honest, the decision was emotional first, then rationalized. That's how humans operate. And yet, when trying to influence others, most people present spreadsheets, arguments, evidence. They stack logic on top of logic. And wonder why nothing shifts. Because they're speaking to the mind, while the real decision-maker sits in the heart. Now imagine addressing emotion first. Imagine recognizing how someone feels before addressing what they think. Instead of saying, "This is the smartest option," you say, "I understand why this feels uncertain." Immediately, tension drops. Because people want acknowledgement before instruction. There's something powerful about feeling seen in your hesitation, seen in your fear, seen in your frustration. And when emotion is acknowledged, it stops screaming. Unacknowledged emotion escalates. Acknowledged emotion softens. That's why telling someone, "Calm down," almost never works. because it dismisses feeling. But saying, "I can see why this matters to you," invites connection. And connection opens persuasion. Think about that. When someone feels emotionally aligned with you, they begin to trust your guidance. Not because you're louder, but because you understand them. And understanding creates safety. Safety creates openness. Openness creates influence. Now let's expand this. Imagine addressing a group. If you only speak facts, some will listen. If you speak to shared emotion, many will. Because groups bond over feeling. Hope, fear, pride, belonging. A skilled influencer does not manipulate these emotions. They recognize them. They name them. They channel them. And that creates unity. But here's the challenge. Emotion is volatile. If you mishandle it, you create chaos. If you ignore it, you create disengagement. So emotional intelligence becomes essential. You must read the room. Notice energy shifts. Observe body language. Listen beyond words. Sometimes what people say is not what they mean. A colleague might argue aggressively, but beneath that aggression is insecurity. A partner might criticize sharply, but beneath that criticism is fear of being unheard. If you react to the surface, you escalate conflict. If you respond to the underlying emotion, you resolve it. And responding requires patience. You must pause long enough to ask yourself, what is this person really feeling? Not what they're saying, what they're feeling. Once you answer that, your response changes automatically. And when your response changes, the outcome changes. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But there's an even more refined layer to this. Sometimes the strongest influence comes from silence. Yes, silence. In heated conversations, most people rush to fill space. They speak quickly. They defend immediately. They interrupt instinctively. But silence creates pressure. Silence invites reflection. When you pause after someone speaks, they often continue. They reveal more. They clarify deeper emotion. Silence shows control. And control commands respect. Now imagine using silence strategically. Instead of reacting to criticism instantly, you pause. You breathe. You respond calmly. That calmness unsettles aggression. Because anger feeds on reaction. Without reaction, it weakens. But this requires mastery over yourself. Because your first instinct is reaction. Your first instinct is defense. Your first instinct is pride. And mastering influence begins with mastering instinct. If you cannot regulate your emotion, you cannot guide someone else's. Now consider something else. People mirror energy. If you enter a conversation tense, tension multiplies. If you enter calm, calm spreads. Emotion is contagious. So before influencing others, you must stabilize yourself. That is the hidden foundation. And very few people practice it consciously. They focus on tactics, on words, on phrasing. But the real power lies in presence. Your emotional presence shapes outcomes more than your arguments ever will. Now imagine combining everything you've learned so far. You stop criticizing. You stop arguing to win. You listen deeply. You validate emotion. You admit fault quickly. You align with desire. You give credit generously. You speak calmly. You pause intentionally. Who would you become? Not just persuasive. Magnetic. And magnetism is influence without force. But there is still one final evolution left. Because even with all this awareness, there will be moments when people resist you strongly. Moments when pride blocks progress. Moments when ego hardens like stone. And in those moments, you'll need one last principle. One that turns resistance into cooperation, without breaking dignity. And once you understand that, you will realize influence was never about changing others. It was about changing yourself first. Because the final barrier to influence is not their resistance. It's your reaction to it. There will be moments when someone refuses to agree with you. Moments when they reject your idea outright. Moments when their tone sharpens and their posture stiffens and the atmosphere tightens like a drawn wire. And in that moment, everything you've learned will be tested. Your instinct will whisper, "Push harder." But pushing harder only hardens them further. Resistance is like a locked door. You can slam against it, or you can look for the key. And the key is this: let them save face. Never corner someone publicly. Never expose their mistake in front of others. Never force them to admit defeat. Because when dignity is threatened, cooperation dies instantly. Think about it. If someone proves you wrong in front of a group, what do you feel first? Embarrassment. And embarrassment quickly transforms into defensiveness. Even if you know they're right. Because the issue is no longer logic. It's pride. So if you want someone to shift their position, give them a graceful exit. Instead of saying, "You were wrong," say, "We may have approached this differently." Instead of announcing their failure, suggest improvement privately. Instead of spotlighting error, highlight opportunity. When someone can adjust without humiliation, they adjust willingly. But when adjustment feels like defeat, they cling to their position. Think about that. How many arguments in your life continued simply because neither person wanted to look weak? How many conflicts escalated because both sides felt exposed? Now imagine becoming the person who protects others' dignity, even in disagreement. You disagree gently. You correct privately. You acknowledge effort before pointing out error. You allow others to maintain respect in front of peers. What happens then? Trust strengthens. Resentment fades. Influence expands. Because dignity is sacred currency in human interaction. Protect it, and people align with you. Threaten it, and they withdraw. But there's another subtle truth. People are more likely to change when the request feels small. If you demand a dramatic shift immediately, they resist. If you invite a slight adjustment, they comply. Small agreements create momentum. Momentum creates larger agreements. It's easier to move a rolling wheel than a stationary one. So begin with yes. Ask questions that lead to agreement. Build rhythm. Build cooperation. And once cooperation begins, direction becomes easier. But here's something even more powerful. When you expect the best from someone, they often rise to meet it. If you label someone careless, they become defensive. If you treat someone as capable, they strive to prove it true. Expectation shapes behavior. Call someone responsible, they act responsibly. Call someone reliable, they try to live up to it. Not always, but more often than you think. Because identity influences action. And if you assign a positive identity, you encourage positive behavior. Now imagine this applied everywhere. With children, with colleagues, with partners, with strangers. Instead of highlighting weakness, you reinforce strength. Instead of focusing on past mistakes, you emphasize future potential. You say, "I know you can handle this." And that belief changes something inside them. Because belief from others becomes self-belief. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. But here is the final realization. Influence is not manipulation. It is alignment. It is understanding human nature deeply enough to move with it, not against it. It is recognizing that every person you meet is protecting pride, seeking significance, craving respect, and driven by desire. When you fight that reality, you struggle. When you work with it, you lead. And leadership is not a title. It's a presence, a way of interacting, a way of speaking, a way of responding. Now think back to the very beginning. You thought people misunderstood you. You thought the problem was external. But the shift began when you realized something uncomfortable. Influence begins internally. The moment you stopped criticizing, you built connection. The moment you stopped arguing to win, you built respect. The moment you listened, you built trust. The moment you honored dignity, You built loyalty. And the moment you aligned desire, you built motivation. Nothing dramatic changed externally, but everything shifted relationally. That is the quiet power most people never master. And now here's the question only you can answer. When you leave this moment, will you protect your ego? Or will you protect the relationship? Because the choice repeats every day. In every conversation. In every disagreement. In every opportunity to either push or understand. And the people who consistently choose understanding rarely struggle for influence. They don't demand it. They attract it. They don't force respect. They earn it. They don't chase loyalty. They cultivate it. And slowly, without noise, without aggression, without domination, they shape the world around them. So the next time you feel the urge to criticize, pause. The next time you feel the urge to win, pause. The next time pride rises, pause. And ask yourself, what outcome do I truly want? Because once you master that pause, you master influence. And once you master influence, you no longer need to convince anyone of anything. You simply become the person others choose to follow. And that is where everything circles back. Because at the very beginning, you believed influence was about speaking better, arguing smarter, proving stronger. But now you see something different. Influence is restraint. Influence is awareness. Influence is choosing long-term respect over short-term victory. And here's the truth most people never fully accept. The hardest person you will ever have to influence is yourself. Your temper, your pride, your need to be right, your hunger for recognition. If you cannot guide those, you cannot guide anyone else. Think about it. How many opportunities have slipped away not because you lacked talent, but because you reacted emotionally? How many relationships weakened not because you were wrong, but because you insisted on proving you were right? How many rooms felt colder not because people disliked you, but because they felt unheard around you? And you've done this too, haven't you? The shift was never about techniques. It was about awareness. Awareness of ego. Awareness of emotion. Awareness of human desire. When you see people not as obstacles, but as individuals protecting their dignity, your entire approach changes. You become patient. You become observant. You become deliberate. And deliberateness is rare. Most people operate on impulse. Impulse argues. Impulse criticizes. Impulse interrupts. But discipline listens. Discipline pauses. Discipline guides gently. And discipline builds influence quietly over time. Now imagine the compound effect of this behavior. Day after day, you respond instead of react. Day after day, you appreciate instead of criticize. Day after day, you protect dignity instead of exposing flaws. What happens? People begin trusting you with more. More responsibility. More honesty. More vulnerability. And vulnerability is the highest level of trust. When someone opens up to you, you have influence already. Not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. And earned influence lasts. Forced influence collapses. Here's something else most people overlook. Influence is not loud. It is subtle. It is often invisible to outsiders. It looks like calm conversations. It looks like mutual respect. It looks like smooth collaboration. But underneath, it is built on countless moments where you chose understanding over ego. You chose empathy over dominance. You chose patience over reaction. That is the hidden work. And hidden work produces visible results. If you understand this already, you're already different from most people. Because most people are still chasing control. They still believe raising their voice increases authority. They still believe pointing out mistakes increases competence. They still believe winning arguments increases respect. But you've seen the illusion now. Respect grows from dignity. Trust grows from consistency. Influence grows from emotional intelligence. Now here's the final reflection. Picture yourself 1 year from now. Same skills, same knowledge, but different presence. Calmer, more observant, less reactive, more strategic. Conversations feel smoother. Conflicts resolve faster. People listen when you speak, not because they have to, but because they want to. That future version of you is not more talented, just more disciplined, more aware, more intentional. And it begins with small choices. A pause before criticism. A question instead of an accusation. A compliment instead of silence. An apology instead of defense. These seem small, but small shifts change social gravity. And social gravity determines how the world responds to you. Now think back to the first uncomfortable idea you heard. That maybe, just maybe, the problem was not others misunderstanding you, but you misunderstanding human nature. And now the lens has changed. People are not difficult by default. They are protective. They are sensitive to pride. They are driven by desire. They are hungry for significance. And once you honor that truth, everything becomes easier. Not effortless, but smoother, more intentional, more effective. You no longer chase approval. You cultivate respect. You no longer demand agreement. You invite alignment. You no longer fight for attention. You create connection. And connection is the real currency. Because when connection exists, influence follows naturally. So the next time you enter a conversation, remember this. Every person in front of you is silently asking, "Do I matter here?" And your answer, through tone, through attention, through respect, will determine everything that follows. You don't need to dominate the room. You need to understand it. You don't need to win every debate. You need to win trust. You don't need to prove your value constantly. You need to make others feel valuable. And when you do that consistently, you will never have to chase influence again. It will walk beside you, quietly, powerfully, naturally. And that is how you win people, not by overpowering them, but by understanding them. And here's the final layer most people never talk about. Influence is not just about how others feel around you. It's about who you become in the process. Because when you practice patience, you become patient. When you practice restraint, you become disciplined. When you practice empathy, you become wise. Influence reshapes the influencer. That's the hidden reward. At first, you may start applying these principles to improve conversations, to reduce conflict, to gain respect. But over time, something deeper happens. You stop needing validation. You stop needing to win. You stop needing to control outcomes. You become steady. And steadiness is power. Think about the people you naturally trust. They don't panic easily. They don't explode emotionally. They don't chase attention. They feel grounded. That grounded presence makes others feel safe. And safety is the foundation of influence. Because when people feel safe, they open up. When they open up, they listen. When they listen, they consider. When they consider, they change. Real influence is not forcing change. It is creating the conditions where change feels safe. That is leadership at its highest level. Not manipulation. Not control. Not performance. But alignment. Now consider this. If you walked into every room with the goal of making others feel respected, how different would your interactions become? If you spoke with the intention of building trust rather than proving intelligence, how different would your reputation become? If you paused long enough to understand before responding, how different would your relationships become? These questions are simple, but their consequences are massive. Most people will read these ideas and nod. Few will practice them. Fewer will stay consistent long enough to see the compound effect. That's where separation happens. Not in talent, not in charisma, but in consistency. Consistency in tone. Consistency in respect. Consistency in emotional control. And over time, that consistency builds something invisible but powerful. Credibility. And credibility is influence that no one questions. It's the reason people defer to certain individuals in tense situations. It's why some voices calm a room instantly. It's why some advice carries more weight. It's not louder. It's trusted. So here's the quiet challenge. Start observing yourself. Not judging. Not criticizing. Just noticing. When do you interrupt? When do you defend too quickly? When do you dismiss someone's idea without fully understanding it? Awareness is the doorway. You cannot change what you do not notice. And once you notice, you gain choice. Choice to pause. Choice to reframe. Choice to elevate the conversation instead of shrinking it. This is where true influence begins. Not in tactics, but in self-mastery. And self-mastery is rare, because it requires humility. It requires admitting that sometimes the fastest way to win is to let someone else feel right. It requires understanding that long-term respect is more valuable than short-term dominance. It requires patience when ego wants speed. But if you commit to this path, you will notice subtle shifts. People will seek your opinion more. They will trust your judgment more. They will confide in you more. Not because you demanded authority, but because you demonstrated maturity. And maturity draws trust naturally. Here's the final truth. Influence is not a destination. It's a byproduct. A byproduct of awareness. A byproduct of empathy. A byproduct of discipline. A byproduct of respect. Focus on becoming the kind of person others feel safe around. Influence will follow. Focus on making others feel heard. Influence will follow. Focus on protecting dignity, yours and theirs. Influence will follow. You don't need to master every technique. You need to master yourself. And when you do, you won't just win people. You'll build relationships that last. You'll shape environments that feel better. You'll create conversations that move forward instead of breaking down. And most importantly, you'll carry a presence that doesn't need to announce itself. It will be felt. Quietly. Consistently. Powerfully. That is the long game. And the long game always wins.